Reason of having an army is mainly for protection. But it's very interesting because when we're talking about protection, sometimes we do forget to ask exactly what kind of protection or what form of protection. And second, we also forget, to ask about what exactly are we protecting? Are we protecting individuals? Are we protecting companies? Are we protecting interest? Are we protecting investment? What are we protecting? When thinking of the concept of having an army or military, soldiers, present in a specific country. The question becomes more interesting when you're also looking at it from a different perspective, from another angle, which is the one of actually trying to understand what might be the reasons, for a domestic land, to have foreign military on its soil. In another term, why do we still see and why is there so many French soldiers, in Francophone Africa in 2024? This is the second part of my analysis, and as always, it's a pleasure to be with you here. Welcome to your favorite podcast, Smart, Intellectual, Knowledgeable African Talks. My name is S.I.K.A. Well, I hope you are part of our team and community of young African intellectuals and people who are strongly passionate about Africa's development. If you're not, this is not difficult at all. All you have to do is to search for the subscribe button, click on it, activate the ring bell so that you don't miss out on any of my interesting analysis and podcast. And you can also share this episode if you happen to enjoy it. You can also drop a comment. And do not forget to click on the like button if you appreciate or if you enjoy this episode. Well, like I was saying in the introduction, I tried to explain, in the episode 42, the reason why we see such a strong presence of military soldiers in Africa, and especially in Francophone Africa. So to do a quick recap, it's not difficult. First of all, the reason why France is present in Francophone Africa, it's because of the former colonial ties between both regions. The second reason is because of the economic interest, which in my opinion is the most important. The third reason is because of political reasons. They need to make sure that whoever was in power or whoever is on charge will continue to be in charge without, infringing on the economic interests of France. This is very important. So this actually takes me to answering the question from my introduction. What are we protecting? And why are we protecting what we are protecting? So the what here is the economic interest. The why is pretty simple. And the why makes sense, especially now in 2024. 60 years ago, the why was not as relevant. Why? Because Francophone Africa was not as open to the international market as it is now. And like I said in my previous analysis, it is partly because of the fact that the elite, the people who formed the elite back then, were in majority raised, educated in France. And this played a very, very important role at safeguarding, the France interest in Francophone Africa. But in the 90s, and most importantly, since the early 2000s, we've seen a new wave of people growing up or being raised and trained, and even having international exposure and international experience outside Francophone Africa, but most importantly, outside France. Many families sent their kids to study overseas, and overseas was no longer restricted or limited to only studying in France. Many Francophone Africans now had multiple options. They could go to many countries easily, and it was way easier, for them to also see their future self studying, working, and earning elsewhere other than France. So this is very important. So now the why became very critical because we are now in a context and an environment where France is no longer guaranteed that whoever is going to be in charge will make sure that, France's interests are paramount. That's the first element. In terms of the domestic resources, France will no longer have priority. And this is also a key element to consider. And why is that? Again, remember, I told you in episode 42, and I just told you, in this episode a couple of seconds ago, that the current generation on the continent, especially in Francophone Africa, is now a multicultural generation. This was more pronounced in the 90s, the 2000s, and from 2000 up to now. Many young people no longer got sent away to study France only. They now have options. And while being abroad, they also make new connections. They bring their own network, and they now have the possibility to be exposed to something different, something new. And once they return back home, they are eager to actually try and to also make sure that, whatever skills they got and whatever network and connection and information they obtain will also benefit their country, but will also benefit their business model. So we no longer have a one-sided business model, a one-sided economic environment, and a one-sided economic structure. We are now in a plural-sided economic vision when it comes to development with a very important approach. And that approach is based on profitability. And profitability sometimes requires competition. And if there's competition, that means there's no longer monopoly. If there's no monopoly, that means France gets to actually step by step lose its economic privilege to deal only with Francophone Africa. So the question of still having French soldier in Africa becomes slightly irrelevant because if the key reason was to protect French economic interest on African, especially Francophone African soil, now we can clearly see that when it comes to the economic aspect, many Francophone African countries are now dealing with non-French speaking countries such as the US, China, India, Malaysia, Dubai, Qatar, you can name it. So what explains the reason? Now it becomes very interesting because if France no longer has, any economic interest to protect, or not to say any, because they still have interest to protect. But in terms of the magnitude of the interest, in terms of percentage or the size has considerably, shrunk from what, they had to protect in the first 30 years post-independence. Now, in the Francophone African market is more open to the international world, and it's a matter of having, the best partner. So the best partner is no longer necessarily a French partner. So why do we still have a military presence in Africa? Because the economic one has been severely diluted. So what's left now is the political aspect and the military aspect. On the political side, the reason why it makes sense for France to maintain a slight, presence in Africa is first of all to make sure that the domestic government continue to protect what's left in terms of France's interest, but to also make sure that they no longer have to deal with too radical people. That's how they call them. And another political reason, which is now a geopolitical reason, is because of the growing influence of Russia and other non-French speaking countries such as China and India. But I think the key concern, of France is the Russian, presence. The reason why Russia is gaining so much support and so much love from the young generation, and the younger generation is raising concern among French authorities. That's the reason why they are so keen on maintaining their military presence in Africa, to making sure that whatever progress, the Russian army is making in Africa, in Francophone Africa particularly, won't be to a level where they can no longer have any business deal or business opportunity in Africa. So again, the political reason is strongly linked with the economic reason. And the last one, like I said, is the military, which also meets my latest argument around controlling and monitoring the foreign influence in Francophone Africa outside than the French influence that they were used to actually see for like over 30 years in Francophone Africa. I hope you've enjoyed this last part of my analysis, discussing why do we have and why do we still see such a strong presence of military soldiers in Africa. You can drop a comment, let me know what you think, and I hope you enjoy also this episode. Thank you for listening to S.I.K.A Talks, the only podcast where strong ideas meet powerful perspectives. À bientôt.